It began the night the mountains fell silent, and something ancient stirred beneath the stars. I'm talking about a silence so complete, it felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something that had been promised since the beginning of time. My name is Marcus Webb, and for 47 years I lived a life so ordinary, it barely registered as living at all. I drove a truck across the endless highways of Montana, hauling grain and timber and whatever else needed moving from one forgotten town to another, watching the same landscapes roll past my window until they blurred into a single endless road going nowhere. I had a wife once, a faith once, a purpose once, but somewhere along the way I lost them all, traded them for the numbing rhythm of wheels on asphalt and the cheap comfort of knowing exactly what each day would bring. But on that September night, everything I thought I understood about reality, about consciousness, about the divine power that Jesus wielded and the secrets he carried, shattered like glass under the gaze of a being who should not have existed, but did. What I'm about to share isn't just a story about meeting something from beyond this world. It's a testimony about the hidden knowledge that's been buried for 2,000 years, the technique that activated the divine potential in Christ and lies dormant in every human being waiting to be awakened. And if you're hearing this now, if something drew you to these words at this exact moment, then maybe you're one of the ones who's ready to remember what you've forgotten, ready to activate what's been sleeping, ready to become what you were always meant to be. Drop a comment right now if you've ever felt like there's a power inside you that you can't access, a knowing that you can't quite reach, a sense that you're capable of so much more than what this world has told you is possible. Let me know I'm not alone in this hunger. And if this resonates with something deep in your soul, hit that subscribe button, because this community we're building isn't just about stories. It's about awakening, about remembering, about finding others who know that the truth is stranger and more magnificent than anything we've been taught. The night it happened, I was parked at a rest stop about 60 miles north of Helena. One of those places that feels abandoned, even when it's not, where the fluorescent lights buzz like dying insects, and the vending machines hum their lonely songs to no one in particular. I'd pulled over because my eyes were burning from too many hours on the road, and my back ached from the constant vibration of the engine, but mostly because something in me needed to stop, needed to be still, needed to break the mechanical rhythm that had become my entire existence. I stepped out into air so cold it burned my lungs, and I looked up at a sky so clear and so vast, it made me feel like the smallest thing that had ever lived. And for the first time in years, I felt something other than numbness. I felt awe. I felt wonder. I felt the tiniest crack in the armor I'd built around my heart. That's when I saw it. Not a light exactly, but a distortion in the sky, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. Except it was freezing, and the distortion moved with intention, with intelligence, with a purpose I could feel even though I couldn't name it. It descended slowly, gracefully, folding space around itself in ways that shouldn't have been possible, and as it got closer, I realized it wasn't a craft in the traditional sense, but something living, something conscious, something that existed at the intersection of matter and thought, of science and spirit, of the physical and the metaphysical. My first instinct was to run, to get back in my truck and drive until I couldn't drive anymore, but my legs wouldn't move, my body wouldn't obey. Not because I was paralyzed, but because some deeper part of me recognized this moment, had been waiting for this moment, had chosen this moment long before I was born into this particular life with its particular struggles and its particular forgetting. The distortion touched down about 30 feet from where I stood, and from within it emerged a figure that was simultaneously alien and familiar, other and intimate, strange and somehow expected. The being stood perhaps 7 feet tall, slender and graceful, with skin that seemed to shimmer between pale luminescence and translucent light, as if its physical form was barely containing the energy that animated it. Its face was angular and refined, with features that suggested Nordic ancestry, mixed with something not quite human, eyes too large and too blue, pupils that seemed to contain entire galaxies spinning in their depths. It wore no clothing that I could see, yet it wasn't naked either, as if its skin itself was a kind of garment woven from light and intention. And when it looked at me, when those impossible eyes met mine, I felt something break open inside me, some seal that had been placed over my consciousness, some amnesia that had kept me trapped in a limited understanding of what I was and what I was capable of becoming. The being didn't speak, not with words, but I heard it anyway. Heard it in my bones, in my blood, in the deepest chambers of my heart, where truth lives before it gets translated into the inadequate language of human speech. It said without saying, "Marcus Webb, you have been calling out in your sleep, crying out in your dreams, begging to remember what you came here to do. I have come in response to that calling, to show you what was hidden, to teach you what was forgotten, to activate what has been dormant since the moment you agreed to forget, so that you could learn to remember. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions, wanted to demand explanations, wanted to retreat into the comfortable skepticism that had protected me from believing in anything I couldn't touch or measure or control. But none of that was possible anymore, because I was standing in the presence of something that shattered every assumption I'd built my life upon. The being moved closer, and I felt a warmth radiating from it. Not heat, but something else, something that felt like home, like safety, like the embrace of a love so vast and so unconditional that I had no reference point for understanding it. "You seek to know what Jesus knew," it continued in that wordless language that bypassed my ears and spoke directly to my consciousness. "You seek to understand the power he wielded, the miracles he performed, the consciousness he embodied. This knowledge has been hidden, buried, coded into symbols and rituals that lost their meaning when they lost their context, but it was never destroyed because it cannot be destroyed. It is written into the fabric of your biology, into the architecture of your brain, into the sacred geometry of the gland that sits at the center of your skull like a throne waiting for its king." I felt something stir in the middle of my forehead, a pressure, a pulse, a sensation I had never noticed before, but that felt ancient and familiar, like a part of me that had been sleeping was beginning to wake. "The pineal gland," the being said, and somehow I knew it was smiling, though its face hadn't changed. "The seat of the soul, the third eye, the gateway between dimensions, the biological structure that allows consciousness to interface with realms beyond the physical. Jesus knew its secrets, knew how to activate it, knew how to open the channels that connect finite awareness to infinite intelligence, and in doing so, he became a living bridge between heaven and earth, between human and divine, between what is and what could be." The being extended one long, delicate finger toward my forehead, and I felt compelled to close my eyes, to surrender to whatever was about to happen, to trust in a way I hadn't trusted since I was a child, kneeling beside my bed and believing with my whole heart that God was listening. The moment its finger touched the space between my eyebrows, everything changed, not gradually but instantaneously, as if a switch had been flipped, as if a door I didn't know existed had been thrown open, as if the entire universe had suddenly become visible in ways I had never imagined possible. I saw light. Not the light of the sun or stars, but the light that exists behind and within and through all things, the light that is consciousness itself, the light that scientists can't measure because they're trying to observe it from within it, like a fish trying to study water while swimming in the ocean. I saw patterns, geometric structures that organized reality at levels both infinitely small and incomprehensibly vast. Fractal designs that repeated across every scale of existence, from the spiral of galaxies to the helix of DNA, to the pinecone shape of the gland now pulsing with energy in the center of my skull. And I saw him, Jesus, not as a figure from history or a character in a story, but as a state of consciousness, as a frequency, as a way of being that any human could access if they knew the technique, if they understood the science, if they were willing to surrender the small self to make room for the infinite self that was their true nature. The pineal gland, the being's voice resonated through the vision, secretes a substance your scientists call dimethyltryptamine, DMT, the spirit molecule, the chemical key that unlocks dimensions of perception normally hidden from waking consciousness. But Jesus understood something your modern researchers have not yet discovered, that this secretion can be controlled, amplified, sustained through specific practices that combine breath, intention, and the activation of energy centers your ancient traditions called chakras. He learned these techniques during the years the Gospels do not mention, the years he spent in the East studying with masters who had preserved knowledge from civilizations far older than recorded history, civilizations that understood the relationship between consciousness and matter, between mind and miracle, between thought and reality. I watched as the vision showed me Jesus as a young man, traveling through lands that would later be called India and Tibet and Egypt, sitting with teachers who recognized in him something extraordinary, a soul that had chosen to incarnate with full knowledge of its mission, a consciousness that had retained access to abilities most humans had forgotten they possessed. I saw him learning to breathe in patterns that activated dormant neural pathways, learning to focus intention in ways that collapsed quantum possibilities into manifest reality, learning to raise the energy at the base of his spine until it pierced through the gland in his skull and opened the channel that mystics called the crown, the portal through which divine intelligence poured into human awareness and human awareness expanded into divine intelligence. What your churches call the Holy Spirit, the being continued, is this very real, very physical, very scientifically demonstrable phenomenon of activated Kundalini energy rising through the central nervous system and stimulating the pineal gland to produce states of consciousness that transcend ordinary perception. Jesus didn't perform miracles through supernatural intervention. He performed them through natural laws that operate at levels of reality most humans don't perceive. Laws that become accessible when consciousness expands beyond the limitations of the thinking mind and merges with the creative intelligence that underlies all existence. The vision shifted, and I saw Jesus walking on water, and I understood that he wasn't defying gravity, but had aligned his consciousness with a frequency where matter responded to intention, where the molecules of his body and the molecules of water existed in a state of coherence that allowed him to choose which physical laws applied and which could be transcended. I saw him healing the sick, and I understood that he wasn't channeling external power, but was activating the innate healing intelligence that exists in every cell, that responds to consciousness, that reorganizes matter according to the blueprint of perfection that exists in the quantum field of infinite possibility. I saw him multiplying loaves and fishes, and I understood that he was working with the holographic nature of reality, where each part contains the whole, where matter is condensed energy and energy responds to focused awareness, where scarcity is an illusion created by limited perception and abundance is the natural state when consciousness aligns with the creative source. But the most important thing he demonstrated, the being's voice grew more intense, more urgent, was resurrection. The ability of consciousness to transcend death, to prove that awareness is not dependent on the physical body, that the soul is eternal, that what you call life and death are simply transitions between different states of the same continuous existence. And this too was made possible through the activation of the pineal gland, through the techniques he had mastered, through the opening of the channel that connects individual consciousness to universal consciousness, that allows the drop to remember it is the ocean, that enables the wave to recognize it is the water. I felt tears streaming down my face, tears of recognition, of remembering, of grief for all the years I had lived in the poverty of limited awareness when this richness had been available all along, when this power had been dormant inside me, waiting to be awakened, when this truth had been hidden in plain sight within the very biology of my brain. The being withdrew its finger and I opened my eyes, gasping, trembling, feeling like I had been born again, like I had died and been resurrected, like I had touched something so profound that nothing would ever be the same. "Why?" I managed to whisper, my voice cracking with emotion. "Why are you showing me this? Why now? Why me?" The being's eyes softened, and in that softness I saw compassion that spanned galaxies, patience that had waited through ages, love that had guided humanity through millennia of forgetting toward this moment of remembering. "Because the time has come," it said, "for these secrets to be revealed, for this knowledge to be restored, for humanity to reclaim the divine potential that was always its birthright. The churches taught you to worship Jesus as the only Son of God, to see him as separate, as unique, as the sole exception to human limitation. But this was never his message. His message was that what he did, you can do also, that the kingdom of heaven is within you, that you are gods who have forgotten your divinity, temples that have forgotten the presence dwelling in their inner sanctuaries." The being gestured toward the sky, and I saw stars rearranging themselves into patterns that told stories older than Earth. cosmologies that included humanity as part of a galactic family, an evolution of consciousness that was reaching a critical point, a threshold moment when the species would either awaken to its potential or remain trapped in the illusion of separation. "We have been watching," it said. "We who are called angels in some traditions and aliens in others. We who are simply beings at different points on the same evolutionary continuum that you are traveling. We who remember what you are in the process of remembering. And we see that humanity stands at a crossroads, that the activation of collective consciousness is accelerating, that more and more individuals are spontaneously awakening, that the pineal glands of millions are beginning to activate through the sheer pressure of the times you are living through the breakdown of old structures, through the intensity of the challenges you face, through the desperation that comes when nothing else works, and you have no choice but to turn inward and discover the power that was always there." I stood there in the freezing Montana night, my entire worldview shattered and reassembled into something I didn't have words for, something that made sense in ways that bypassed logic and spoke directly to a knowing that lived deeper than thought. "Teach me," I heard myself saying. "Teach me the technique. Show me how to activate what Jesus activated. Help me remember what I came here to remember." The being nodded, and I felt a wave of approval, of recognition, of acknowledgement that I had asked the right question, that I had shown the willingness required, that I had demonstrated the humility necessary to receive what was about to be given. "The technique," it began, "is both simple and complex, both physical and metaphysical, both ancient and perfectly suited to your modern understanding of neuroscience and quantum physics. It begins with the breath, for breath is the bridge between conscious and unconscious, between voluntary and involuntary, between the mind and the body's wisdom. Jesus learned to breathe in a specific pattern, a rhythm that activates the parasympathetic nervous system, that calms the thinking mind, that allows the brain to shift from beta waves to alpha to theta, to the delta frequencies where the veil between dimensions grows thin. The being demonstrated, though it didn't breathe in any way I recognized, its chest rising and falling in a pattern that I felt compelled to mimic, a rhythm that was simultaneously relaxing and energizing, that seemed to tune my entire being to a different frequency. "Breathe in slowly through the nose for a count of 4, it instructed. And I did, feeling the cold air filling my lungs, expanding my rib cage, oxygenating my blood. "Hold for a count of 7, it continued, and I held, feeling pressure building, energy gathering, something coiling at the base of my spine. "Exhale through the mouth for a count of 8, it said, and I released, feeling warmth spreading through my body, tension dissolving, awareness expanding. "This is the foundation," the being explained. "The breath pattern that Jesus used, that mystics across every tradition have discovered independently, that creates the physiological conditions necessary for the pineal gland to activate. But breath alone is not enough. Intention must be combined with breath. Focused awareness must be directed to the center of the skull, to the gland itself, imagining it as a pine cone, as a jewel, as a portal beginning to open." I closed my eyes again and focused my attention inward, visualizing the pineal gland, seeing it in my mind's eye as the being described, feeling it respond to my awareness, feeling it pulse, feeling it warm, feeling something shifting in the center of my head that I had never felt before. Now the being's voice guided me deeper. "As you breathe and focus, begin to draw energy up from the base of your spine, from the root center, pulling it up through each energy center like water being drawn up through a straw, through the sacral center in your lower abdomen, through the solar plexus, through the heart, through the throat, until it reaches the center of your forehead, the third eye, the location of the pineal gland." I followed the instructions and I felt it, felt something moving inside me, something that was simultaneously energy and awareness, something that was both physiological and mystical, something that was activating neural pathways and opening spiritual channels simultaneously because they were the same thing, because there was no separation between sacred and scientific, between divine and biological, between spirit and matter. The pressure in my forehead intensified, became almost uncomfortable, and just when I thought I couldn't tolerate it anymore, something broke through, something opened, something flooded into my awareness that was so vast and so luminous that I gasped and fell to my knees. I was no longer in my body, Or rather, I was in my body but also far beyond it, existing simultaneously in the physical form, kneeling on cold pavement, and in a dimension of pure consciousness where form was optional, where thought created reality instantaneously, where I was connected to everything and everyone across all time and space. I saw my life from this expanded perspective, saw every moment, every choice, every experience as part of a perfect pattern, a curriculum designed to teach me specific lessons, to break me of specific illusions, to prepare me for this exact moment of awakening. I saw the pain I had endured not as punishment, but as pressure, as the force required to crack the shell, to break through the limitations, to push consciousness beyond its comfortable boundaries into territories it would never have explored without necessity. I saw my lost faith not as abandonment by God, but as a necessary dark night, a stripping away of childish concepts, a clearing of ground so that authentic understanding could take root. I saw my years of driving, of endless roads, of mechanical repetition, as meditation in motion, as a practice that had quieted my mind without my knowing it, that had prepared neural pathways for this activation, that had created the emptiness necessary to receive this fullness. And I saw Jesus again, but this time I saw him as he truly was, not a distant savior who did things I could never do, but an elder brother who had walked this path before me, who had activated what I was now activating, who had demonstrated what was possible so that others would know it was possible, who had said, "These things I do, you will do also, and greater things than these," because he meant it, because he knew that every human carried the same potential, the same divine blueprint, the same capacity to merge human consciousness with cosmic consciousness and become a living channel for the creative intelligence that sourced all existence. I don't know how long I remained in that state, minutes or hours or days. Time had become meaningless, but eventually I felt myself being gently drawn back, felt the being's presence guiding me, helping me integrate, teaching me how to return to normal consciousness while retaining the memory, the knowing, the activation that had occurred. I opened my eyes and the world looked different, not changed but revealed, like I was seeing it for the first time, seeing the light within things, seeing the consciousness animating every leaf and stone and molecule of air, seeing reality as it actually was beneath the surface appearance of separation and solidity. The being stood before me, and I understood that it had been holding space, protecting me, ensuring that the activation happened safely, that I wasn't overwhelmed, that I could integrate what I had experienced without losing my grip on consensual reality. "You have begun," it said, and I heard approval in its wordless communication. "You have activated what was dormant. You have opened what was closed. You have remembered what was forgotten. But this is only the beginning. The technique must be practiced, the channel must be strengthened, the activation must be stabilized and integrated into your daily life." I nodded, understanding that what I had experienced was a gift, a glimpse, a preview of what was possible. But that true mastery required dedication, required practice, required choosing again and again to prioritize this work over the comfortable distractions that kept most humans asleep. "The world will not understand," the being continued. "Those still trapped in limited consciousness will mock, will doubt, will accuse you of delusion or deception. But this does not matter. Your task is not to convince anyone. Your task is to embody, to demonstrate through the quality of your presence, through the miracles small and large that will begin to manifest in your life, through the peace and power and purpose that will radiate from you as you continue to practice, to activate, to align with the divine intelligence that now flows through your opened channel." The being began to fade, to dissolve back into the distortion from which it had emerged, but before it disappeared completely, it spoke one final message that burned itself into my consciousness with the force of eternal truth. "Tell them," it said, "that the second coming of Christ is not a singular event in linear time, but the awakening of Christ consciousness in every prepared heart, that Jesus is returning not from the sky, but from within, that the kingdom of heaven descends to earth when humans remember they are divine, when pineal glands activate across the collective, when enough individuals practice the technique and open the channel and become living embodiments of the love and power and wisdom that Jesus demonstrated. Tell them that they are the second coming they have been waiting for, The distortion vanished, and I was alone again in the parking lot. The fluorescent lights still buzzing, the vending machine still humming, the cold Montana night still pressing in from all sides. But I was not the same man who had stepped out of his truck an hour or a lifetime ago. I stood on shaky legs, my body vibrating with energy, my mind struggling to process what had happened, my heart cracked open in ways that would never fully close again. I looked at my hands, and I could have sworn I saw light emanating from them, subtle but unmistakable, and when I touched my forehead, I felt heat, felt the gland still pulsing, felt the channel still open, felt the connection still active. I got back in my truck, but I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, breathing the pattern the being had taught me, feeling energy rising from my spine to my skull, feeling the activation strengthening, feeling something fundamental shifting in the very structure of my consciousness. And then I began to cry, really cry, sobs that came from depths I didn't know I had, releasing decades of accumulated pain and longing and searching, releasing the grief of having lived so long in the poverty of separation when this wealth of union had been available all along. I cried for all the years I had wasted, for all the potential I had left dormant, for all the miracles I had missed because I didn't believe they were possible. But I also cried with joy, with gratitude, with relief that it wasn't too late, that I had been given another chance, that I was being invited to participate in something so much greater than my small life and its small concerns. When the tears finally subsided, I pulled out a notebook I kept in the glove compartment, one I used for tracking deliveries and mileage, and I began to write, capturing every detail I could remember, describing the technique, recording the being's words, documenting the experience while it was still fresh and vivid, and burning in my consciousness like a sacred fire that could not be extinguished. I wrote for hours, filling page after page with descriptions that felt inadequate, with words that could not capture the essence of what I had experienced, but I wrote anyway, trusting that even imperfect testimony was better than silence, that even broken language could point toward truth, that someone somewhere might read these words and recognize something in them, might feel something stirring in response, might be moved to try the technique themselves and discover what I had discovered. As dawn began to break over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, I closed the notebook and started the engine, but I didn't return to my route, didn't resume the mechanical rhythm that had defined my existence for so long. Instead, I drove toward home, toward the small house I had been avoiding, toward the wife I had neglected, toward the life I had been running from, knowing that I could not continue as I had been, knowing that everything had changed, knowing that I had been given a responsibility, a mission, a calling that I could not ignore even if I wanted to. The drive took 3 hours, but it felt like minutes. My mind still expanded, still processing, still integrating the activation that had occurred. And when I pulled into the driveway, I saw Sarah standing on the porch, her face a mixture of anger and worry, and something else, something that looked like hope. She had been up all night waiting for me, waiting for an explanation, waiting for me to either come home or finally not come home, to either choose our marriage or choose the road, to either be present or be gone. But when I stepped out of the truck, when she looked into my eyes, when she saw something there that hadn't been there before, her expression changed, softened, opened. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice breaking, "what happened to you? You look different. You feel different." I walked toward her, and as I did, I noticed something extraordinary. The pain I knew she carried in her left hip, the chronic condition that had plagued her for years, seemed to lessen, seemed to shift, seemed to respond to my presence in ways that shouldn't have been possible. I reached out and took her hands, and the moment we touched, I felt energy flowing through me, through the channel that had been opened, through the activation that was still pulsing in my pineal gland, and I directed it without thinking, without trying, simply allowing it to flow where it wanted to flow, trusting the intelligence that now moved through me. Sarah gasped, her eyes widening, and she stumbled back, catching herself against the porch railing. "What was that?" she demanded, but her voice held no fear, only wonder, only curiosity, only the recognition that something real had just occurred, something that defied explanation but could not be denied. "My hip," she said, tentatively moving her leg, testing it. "Marcus, the pain is gone. It's completely gone. What did you do?" I opened my mouth to explain, to tell her everything, to share what had happened, but no words came, or rather too many words came, flooding my mind in a torrent of revelation and technique and cosmology and truth, and I realized I would need time, would need to organize my thoughts, would need to learn how to translate what I now knew into language that others could receive. So instead I just smiled, and in that smile Sarah saw something that made her eyes fill with tears, saw the man she had married before he got lost, saw the light she had believed in before it got buried, saw the possibility of a future different from the past, saw hope returning like spring after the longest winter. We went inside, and I made coffee while she watched me with an expression I couldn't quite read, and when we finally sat down at the kitchen table, where we had shared 10,000 meals and 1,000 arguments, I began to speak, slowly at first, finding my words, testing how much she could hear, how much she could accept, how much she was ready to know. I told her about the being, about the activation, about the technique, about Jesus and the pineal gland, and the hidden knowledge that had been preserved across millennia, and I watched her face as I spoke, watched it cycle through skepticism and wonder and fear and excitement, watched her wrestling with the impossibility of what I was saying, and the undeniable evidence of what had just happened to her hip. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time, her coffee growing cold in her hands, her eyes distant as she processed, as she evaluated, as she decided whether to believe or dismiss, whether to open or close, whether to join me on this path or send me away as crazy. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Show me," she said. "Teach me the technique. Let me experience what you experienced. Let me see for myself if this is real or if you've lost your mind and I'm about to lose mine with you." And so I taught her, guided her through the breathing pattern, helped her focus her attention on the pineal gland, encouraged her to draw energy up from the base of her spine, and I watched as her face changed, as her breathing deepened, as her body began to relax and then energize, as something shifted in her just as it had shifted in me. She practiced for perhaps 20 minutes, and though she didn't have the dramatic opening I had experienced, she felt something, felt the gland pulse, felt the energy move, felt a glimpse of something beyond normal consciousness that intrigued her enough to want to continue, to want to practice, to want to explore. "This is real," she said when she opened her eyes, and her voice carried a certainty I hadn't heard in years. "I don't understand it. I don't know what it means, but it's real. I can feel it. And Marcus, I want to learn more." That was the beginning of our journey together, a journey that would transform our marriage, our lives, our understanding of everything. A journey that started with a simple technique taught by a Nordic being on a freezing Montana night and would lead us into territories we never imagined, into experiences we never dreamed possible, into a community of others who had also been contacted, also been taught, also been activated, who were also learning to embody the Christ consciousness that Jesus had demonstrated 2,000 years ago. We practiced the technique daily, sometimes together, sometimes separately, experimenting with different variations, exploring different approaches, discovering that the basic pattern could be adapted, could be personalized, could be refined based on individual biology and temperament and intention. And as we practiced, things began to change. Not dramatically at first, but subtly, persistently, undeniably. Sarah's chronic pain didn't return, my sleep improved, our intuition sharpened, our capacity for presence deepened, our relationship healed in ways that talk therapy and marriage counseling had never touched. We found ourselves more patient with each other, more compassionate, more able to see beneath surface behaviors to the fear or hurt or longing that motivated them, more capable of responding from love rather than reacting from wounding. And beyond the personal transformations, we began to notice what the being had called miracles, small synchronicities at first, right people appearing at right times, needed resources showing up exactly when required, solutions emerging for problems that had seemed unsolvable, as if reality itself was becoming more responsive, more malleable, more willing to collaborate with our intentions. I started a journal, documenting everything, recording the practices, describing the experiences, tracking the changes, and Sarah did the same, and sometimes we would compare notes, marveling at how our separate observations confirmed and complemented each other, how we were both perceiving shifts in consciousness, in energy, in the very fabric of our daily existence. We told no one at first, fearful of judgment, protective of something too precious and too fragile to expose to skepticism. But eventually we felt called to share, felt that the knowledge we had been given was not meant to be hoarded, but spread, not meant to be hidden, but revealed to those ready to receive it. We started small, mentioning it carefully to a few trusted friends, offering to teach the technique to anyone interested, expecting rejection or ridicule, but finding instead a hunger we hadn't anticipated, a yearning we hadn't recognized, a readiness we hadn't dared to hope for. People were waking up everywhere, spontaneously activating, independently discovering, collectively remembering, as if humanity as a species was reaching a tipping point, as if the time the being had spoken of was indeed at hand, as if the second coming of Christ consciousness was beginning to manifest not in a single individual, but in a wave of awakening sweeping across the collective. We began holding small gatherings in our living room, just 5 or 6 people at first, seekers who had heard about our experience through word of mouth, who came with a mixture of curiosity and desperation, who sat in our modest space with its worn furniture and fading wallpaper and listened as I shared what I had learned, as I described the technique, as I guided them through their first attempts at activation. Some felt nothing the first time, their minds too busy, their nervous systems too agitated, their expectations too rigid to allow the subtle shifts that preceded the dramatic openings. But they came back, practiced again, persisted, until something broke through, until they felt the pulse, until they experienced the unmistakable sensation of energy rising, of consciousness expanding, of the pineal gland beginning to wake from its long dormancy. Others had immediate experiences, powerful activations that left them shaking and weeping and transformed, and I learned to hold space for both, to honor each person's unique process, to trust that the intelligence guiding this awakening knew exactly what each soul needed and when they needed it. I watched as a farmer named Jacob, a man who had never meditated a day in his life, sat in our living room and practiced the breathing pattern and suddenly burst into tears, describing a vision of Jesus standing before him, not as a distant religious figure but as a living presence, a consciousness he could feel and communicate with, a brother welcoming him home after a long exile in forgetfulness. I watched as a schoolteacher named Rebecca, skeptical and analytical by nature, approached the practice with scientific curiosity and found herself thrust into an experience of unity consciousness where she felt her awareness merge with everything around her, where boundaries dissolved, and she knew beyond doubt that separation was illusion, that at the deepest level, all beings shared one consciousness experiencing itself through infinite forms. I watched as a mechanic named Thomas, gruff and practical and dismissive of anything spiritual, reluctantly agreed to try the technique because his wife dragged him to our gathering, and 30 minutes later opened his eyes with an expression of such wonder that he looked like a child seeing snow for the first time, describing sensations of light flooding his skull, of energy coursing through his spine, of knowing things he had no rational way of knowing, but that felt more certain than anything he had learned through conventional means. And I watched as each of these individuals, after their activation experiences, began to change, not overnight, but progressively. Not through effort, but through natural expression of their expanded awareness, becoming more kind, more patient, more intuitive, more aligned with purposes larger than their personal survival and comfort, more capable of manifesting what they needed, more able to heal themselves and others, more attuned to the subtle guidance that flowed through the opened channel, connecting their individual consciousness to the cosmic intelligence that sourced all creation. The gatherings grew larger, word spreading through networks we didn't control, people driving hours to attend, some staying for days, camping in our yard, turning our simple home into an impromptu retreat center, a sanctuary for those hungry for truth, for those ready to activate, for those willing to do the inner work required to sustain and integrate the openings they experienced. Sarah and I found ourselves becoming teachers without having sought that role, guides without formal training, facilitators of a process that seemed to unfold according to its own intelligence, its own timing, its own mysterious logic that transcended anything we could plan or control. We learned by doing, made mistakes, overcame obstacles, discovered through trial and error what worked and what didn't, what supported activation and what hindered it, what helped integration and what caused inflation or spiritual bypassing or dissociation from the practical demands of embodied existence. We learned that diet mattered, that certain foods supported pineal gland function while others calcified it, that the fluoride in water and the processed chemicals in modern food were not accidents but deliberate suppressions, ways of keeping the population docile, disconnected from their power, trapped in limited consciousness that made them easy to control and manipulate. We learned that sleep patterns mattered, that the gland was most active during certain hours, that the quality of darkness affected melatonin production, which affected the gland's ability to produce the endogenous DMT that opened dimensional perception. We learned that emotional clearing was essential, that trauma trapped in the body created blockages in the energy system, that the Kundalini force rising from the base of the spine could not flow freely through channels clogged with unprocessed pain, unresolved grief, unexpressed anger, that healing had to accompany activation, or the results would be unstable, unsustainable, potentially dangerous to fragile psyches not prepared for the intensity of expanded awareness. We developed protocols, created structures, established guidelines, not to limit the experience but to support it, not to control the process but to create safe containers within which transformation could occur without causing harm, without overwhelming vulnerable individuals, without triggering psychotic breaks or spiritual emergencies that we weren't equipped to handle. And through it all, I continued to practice the technique myself, continued to deepen my own activation, continued to explore the territories that opened as the channel strengthened, as the gland pulsed more consistently, as my consciousness learned to navigate states that had once seemed impossible but were becoming familiar, even comfortable, even natural. I began to have experiences that mirrored what I had read about Jesus, began to know things I had no ordinary way of knowing, began to sense the thoughts and feelings of others, began to see the energetic patterns underlying physical illness before symptoms manifested, began to understand how intention shaped reality at quantum levels, where observation collapsed probability waves into particular outcomes. One night, about 6 months after my initial encounter with the Nordic being, I was sitting alone in the darkness practicing the breathing pattern when I felt the familiar pressure building in my forehead, felt the energy rising from my spine, felt the gland beginning to pulse with increasing intensity, and then something new happened, something I hadn't experienced before, the sensation of my consciousness literally leaving my body, not metaphorically or imaginatively, but actually, undeniably, experiencing myself as awareness without form, as a point of perspective floating above my physical body, looking down at the shell sitting in meditation posture, seeing it from outside, seeing the energy field surrounding it, seeing the light emanating from the activated gland like a beacon in the darkness. I wasn't afraid, wasn't panicked, wasn't struggling to return. I was simply observing, marveling, understanding that what I had always called I was not the body, but the consciousness inhabiting the body, that death would be nothing more than this same process, but without the option of return, that the soul's survival of physical dissolution was not a matter of faith, but a demonstrable fact I was experiencing directly. I floated there for what might have been minutes or hours, time having no meaning in that state, and then I felt a pull, a gentle invitation to go further, to explore beyond the confines of my immediate environment, and I found myself moving, not through physical space, but through dimensions of consciousness, through realms that existed alongside material reality, but at different frequencies, different vibrational rates that normally remained invisible to waking awareness. I saw what mystics called the astral plane, a dimension where thought forms were visible, where desires and fears took shape, where the collective unconscious of humanity swirled in patterns of light and shadow, where entities existed that had never been physical and others that were once human, but had become trapped between dimensions, unable or unwilling to move forward in their evolution. I saw what I can only describe as the Akashic records, though I had never believed in such things. Libraries of light containing every thought, every word ever spoken, every action ever taken, the complete history of all consciousness recorded in patterns of energy, accessible to those who knew how to access them. I saw Jesus there, or rather I saw the consciousness that had embodied as Jesus, Still active, still teaching, still guiding, working with souls across dimensions, preparing humanity for the shift that was approaching, coordinating with countless other beings, both terrestrial and extraterrestrial, all participants in a cosmic plan of awakening that had been unfolding across ages, across worlds, across levels of reality I had never imagined. And I understood, in a flash of knowing that bypassed thought and entered directly into certainty, that what religions called angels were simply beings at different evolutionary stages, some who had never been human and others who had transcended humanity, all working according to their capacity and calling to support the awakening of consciousness wherever it appeared. That the universe was teeming with intelligence, with awareness, with entities operating according to purposes aligned with the ultimate evolution of all beings toward reunion with the source from which all emerged. I returned to my body gently, guided back by an intelligence that ensured the transition was smooth, that I didn't snap back traumatically, that I could integrate what I had seen without becoming destabilized or ungrounded. And when I opened my physical eyes, I found Sarah sitting across from me, her face illuminated by candlelight, tears streaming down her cheeks. She had been watching, had seen something shift in my energy field, had felt called to sit with me, to hold space, to be present as I journeyed, and when I told her where I had been, what I had seen, she nodded with understanding, with recognition, because she too had begun having out-of-body experiences, had been exploring the same territories through her own practice, had been discovering the same truths through her own direct experience. We realized that we were no longer alone in this, that we had become part of a global network of activating humans, that the being's prophecy was manifesting, that Christ consciousness was indeed returning not from the sky, but from within, that pineal glands were awakening across the collective, that the second coming was a distributed event, a mass activation, a species-wide remembering of divine potential that had been dormant since humanity fell into the density of matter and forgot its celestial origin. We began connecting with others who had been contacted, who had been taught similar techniques, who had experienced their own activations and were now teaching, sharing, spreading the knowledge as we were, creating a grassroots movement of awakening that operated outside official channels, outside religious institutions, outside academic approval, a return to the original mystery school teachings that Jesus had learned and embodied, that had been preserved in fragments across esoteric traditions, but were now being restored to their full power and practical application. Through these connections, we learned that the Nordic beings were not the only ones making contact, that humanity was being approached by multiple extraterrestrial species, some humanoid and others decidedly alien, all apparently coordinating their efforts, all delivering compatible messages about human potential and planetary transformation, all teaching variations of the same fundamental technique for activating dormant capacities, for opening channels between dimensions, for remembering what had been forgotten and becoming what we had always been meant to become. We heard stories from people across the country and around the world, farmers in Kansas and fishermen in Norway and teachers in Brazil and mechanics in Australia, all describing encounters with beings who taught them about the pineal gland, about breath and intention, about energy centers and kundalini activation, about the connection between human biology and cosmic consciousness, about Jesus as a way shower rather than a singular exception, about the approaching shift that would separate those ready to evolve from those determined to remain in limitation. The consistency of the reports was striking, too similar to be coincidence, too detailed to be fantasy, too transformative in their effects to be delusion, and we began to understand that we were witnessing something unprecedented, a coordinated intervention by advanced intelligences who had been watching humanity's evolution and had determined that the species was ready, or at least portions of it were ready, to receive knowledge that had been withheld, to access abilities that had been dormant, to step into a new phase of development that would fundamentally alter what it meant to be human. But we also heard darker reports, stories of those whose activations had gone wrong, who had opened channels they couldn't close, who had contacted entities they couldn't manage, who had triggered energies they couldn't integrate, who had ended up hospitalized or institutionalized or worse. their psyches shattered by experiences they weren't prepared for, their nervous systems burned out by energies they hadn't learned to regulate, their lives destroyed by premature openings that came without the necessary foundation of emotional healing and spiritual maturity. These cautionary tales sobered us, reminded us that the path was not without dangers, that activating the pineal gland was like opening Pandora's box, releasing forces that could heal or harm depending on how they were handled, that the technique we were teaching carried responsibility, required discernment, demanded that we screen participants carefully and provide adequate support and follow-up care for those who experienced challenging or destabilizing activations. We developed relationships with psychologists and energy healers and body workers who understood what we were doing, who could help people integrate their experiences, who could provide grounding and stabilization when needed, who could distinguish between spiritual emergence and mental illness, between authentic activation and ego inflation, between genuine transformation and delusional bypassing of necessary psychological work. And through all of this, I continued to deepen my own practice, continued to explore the capacities that were emerging, continued to test the boundaries of what was possible, continued to discover that those boundaries kept expanding, that each breakthrough revealed new territories to explore, new abilities to develop, new mysteries to investigate, new levels of consciousness to embody. I found that I could heal with touch, that energy flowed through my hands when I placed them on someone with intention to help, that chronic conditions resolved, that acute symptoms diminished, that the body's innate intelligence responded to the coherent field generated by my activated state, reorganizing itself according to the template of perfection that existed in the quantum realm of infinite possibility. I found that I could see auras, the energy fields surrounding living beings, reading in their colors and patterns information about physical health, emotional state, spiritual development, karmic patterns, seeing what was invisible to ordinary sight but obvious to expanded perception, using this information to guide healing work, to direct energy where it was needed, to identify blockages before they manifested as illness. I found that I could communicate telepathically, not perfectly or consistently, but increasingly, picking up thoughts and feelings from others, broadcasting intentions that were received without words, experiencing direct mind-to-mind contact that transcended language, that operated at speeds thought couldn't match, that conveyed nuances ordinary communication couldn't capture. And I found that I could manifest, not magically or instantly, but progressively and reliably, by aligning my consciousness with desired outcomes, by maintaining coherent focus on specific intentions, by trusting the intelligence of the field to organize circumstances and resources in ways I couldn't orchestrate through effort alone, watching as needed money appeared, as right opportunities emerged, as perfect synchronicities unfolded, as reality became increasingly responsive to consciousness, increasingly willing to collaborate with clear intention, backed by activated awareness. These abilities didn't make me special, didn't set me apart from others, because everyone who practiced the technique with dedication began developing similar capacities, each according to their unique gifts, their particular soul purposes, their specific roles in the larger plan that was unfolding, some becoming powerful healers, others becoming profound teachers, others becoming bridges between dimensions, others becoming anchors of light in dark places, others becoming warriors dismantling systems of oppression, all contributing to the collective awakening according to their calling, their preparation, their willingness to serve something greater than personal comfort or conventional success. Sarah's gifts manifested differently than mine. She became extraordinarily intuitive, able to read people with uncanny accuracy, able to sense what was hidden, what was denied, what was seeking expression, able to ask the exact question that unlocked stuck energy, able to hold space with such presence that others felt safe enough to release what they had carried for lifetimes. She became a midwife of souls, helping people birth their authentic selves, supporting them through the death of false identities, celebrating their emergence into truth, and I watched her blossom into power she had never imagined, watched her step into authority she had never claimed, watched her become a force for transformation that operated through love rather than will, through receptivity rather than assertion, through yielding rather than forcing, embodying the feminine principle that balanced my more masculine approach. Together, creating a dynamic that was more effective than either of us could have been alone. 2 years after my initial encounter, as our work expanded and our community grew, I began having dreams of the Nordic being, visions where it appeared to me during sleep, continuing my education, teaching me things too complex for waking consciousness, downloading information directly into my unconscious mind, where it would surface when needed, preparing me for what was coming, for the acceleration that was approaching, for the challenges and opportunities that would emerge as more humans activated, as the collective consciousness shifted, as the old world died and the new world struggled to be born. In one dream, the being showed me a timeline not linear but multidimensional, branches splitting and converging, possibilities collapsing into probabilities, the future not fixed but fluid, responsive to choices being made in each moment by millions of awakening souls whose decisions were creating the reality that would manifest. I saw that humanity stood at a bifurcation point, a moment where the species could evolve to a new level of consciousness or collapse back into darkness, where the activation happening now was a test, a challenge, an opportunity that had occurred before in human history and been squandered, that civilizations had risen to this threshold and failed to cross it, falling back into ages of forgetting, into cycles of suffering, into repetitions of the same patterns until enough souls were ready to choose differently, to transcend the limitations that had kept humanity trapped in separation consciousness for thousands of years. The being showed me that this time was different, that something had shifted in the cosmic plan, that support was being provided on unprecedented levels, that the veil between dimensions was thinning deliberately, that contact was increasing intentionally, that everything possible was being done to help humanity make the leap, to support the activation, to midwife the birth of a new human, but that ultimately the choice remained with each individual, that no one could be forced to evolve, that free will was sacred and would be honored even if it meant choosing limitation, choosing suffering, choosing to remain asleep while others awakened around them. I saw in the vision that the separation Jesus spoke of, the division of sheep and goats, the harvest of wheat and tares, was not about external judgment but about internal resonance, that those who had activated their pineal glands, who had opened their channels, who had aligned with Christ consciousness, would naturally gravitate toward one frequency, one timeline, one-dimensional reality, while those who remained closed, who refused the activation, who clung to separation consciousness, would gravitate toward another, and that this sorting was already happening, was accelerating, was creating two distinct human populations occupying the same space, but experiencing increasingly different realities based on their level of consciousness, their vibrational frequency, their willingness to evolve. The being explained that this was the true meaning of the rapture, not a physical removal of believers, but a dimensional shift of consciousness, where those ready to ascend would experience reality at a higher frequency, would perceive possibilities invisible to those still operating at lower frequencies, would live in what could only be described as heaven on earth, while others continued in the hell of separation, of fear, of conflict, of limitation. Both groups inhabiting the same planet, but existing in parallel dimensions that would gradually drift further apart until the separation became complete, until communication between them became impossible, until they might as well be living on different worlds, though they occupied the same geographical space. I woke from that dream with profound sadness and profound hope intermingled. Sadness for those who would choose to remain behind, who would miss this opportunity, who would continue in suffering when liberation was available. Hope for those who were waking up, who were practicing the technique, who were activating their divine potential, who were becoming the embodied presence of Christ consciousness that would transform the world, not through force, but through frequency, not through preaching, but through being, not through converting others, but through radiating a light so compelling that those ready to see would be drawn to it like moths to flame, like flowers to sun, like souls to home. I shared the dream with Sarah and with our growing community, and I watched faces as I described what I had seen, watched some grow troubled and others grow excited, watched the information land differently in different people according to their readiness, their openness, their capacity to hold the enormity of what was being revealed. Some rejected it, found it too extreme, too exclusive, too judgmental, preferring a more comfortable spirituality that promised universal salvation without requiring transformation, that offered enlightenment without demanding death of ego, that guaranteed ascension without the difficult inner work of clearing trauma and healing wounds and surrendering everything that stood between their current state and their divine potential. These people gradually stopped coming to our gatherings, drifted away to gentler teachings, to more accommodating philosophies, to paths that didn't ask so much, and I learned to let them go without judgment, without trying to convince them, trusting that each soul knew its own timing, that what felt right for some would feel threatening to others, that the technique and the teaching would reach those meant to receive it and pass by those not yet ready. But others leaned in, intensified their practice, dedicated themselves more fully, recognizing the urgency, feeling the acceleration, sensing that time was indeed short, that a window of opportunity was open but would not remain open indefinitely, that choices made now would have consequences extending far beyond this lifetime into the eternal existence of their immortal souls. These became the core community, the dedicated practitioners, the ones who met regularly to practice together, to share experiences, to support each other through the challenges that arose, through the dark nights of the soul, through the ego deaths and the kundalini crises and the dimensional bleeds where other realities leaked into this one in ways that were disorienting and sometimes terrifying. We learned to navigate these challenges together, developed protocols for managing difficult experiences, created buddy systems where no one practiced alone until they were stable enough to hold the intensity without support, and gradually, person by person, soul by soul, we built a community of activated humans, a tribe of the awakening, a family bound not by blood, but by shared commitment to evolution, to transformation, to embodying the Christ consciousness that was available to all but claimed by few. 3 years after my initial encounter, I was contacted again, not by the Nordic being but by another entity, this one appearing as pure light without form, communicating in symbols and feelings rather than words, and it showed me what was coming in the next phase, showed me that as more humans activated, as the collective frequency rose, as Christ consciousness anchored more deeply into the planetary grid, certain abilities would become widespread, that what seemed miraculous now would become commonplace, that healing and telepathy and manifestation and interdimensional perception would be the new normal for those who had completed the activation process. The entity showed me communities forming, networks of activated humans creating new social structures based on cooperation rather than competition, on unity consciousness rather than separation, on divine guidance rather than human will. Living demonstrations of heaven on earth, places where children would be born already activated, already connected, already operating from their divine nature because they would be conceived and gestated and raised by parents who had done the work, who had cleared their lineages, who had healed their wounds, who could pass on pure templates rather than traumatic patterns. I saw technologies emerging, not through intellectual development, but through direct download from higher dimensions, solutions to energy crises and environmental collapse and disease and aging, all made possible by consciousness operating at frequencies where matter was pliable, where thought created form, where limitation was recognized as illusion and transcended through alignment with the infinite creative intelligence that sourced all existence. And I saw myself and Sarah as part of this unfolding, not special or elevated, but simply fulfilling our particular function, teaching the technique, holding the space, anchoring the frequency, serving as midwives for the birth of the new human, the Homo Luminous, the Christed being that humanity was always meant to become once it remembered its divine origin and reclaimed its cosmic heritage. The vision filled me with such joy, such excitement, such anticipation for what was possible, for what was coming, for what we were all becoming together. And when it ended, when I returned to ordinary consciousness, I found myself laughing and crying simultaneously, overwhelmed by gratitude for having been chosen to participate, for having been given this knowledge, for having been activated at this particular moment in human history, when everything was changing, when the old age was ending and the new age was beginning, when the prophecies were fulfilling not as religious dogma had predicted, but as cosmic intelligence had always intended. I called together our core community and shared what I had seen, And together we recommitted to the work, to the practice, to the mission of spreading this knowledge as far and as wide as possible while time remained, while the window was open, while souls were still choosing, still deciding, still determining their eternal trajectory through the quality of consciousness they cultivated, through the frequency they aligned with, through the choice they made to activate or remain dormant, to awaken or stay asleep, to evolve or stagnate. We intensified our efforts, began traveling to other cities, connecting with other groups, creating a network of teachers trained in the technique, vetted for integrity, tested for stability, empowered to share what they had learned, to activate others as they had been activated, to become nodes in an expanding web of light that was spreading across the planet, growing stronger each day, reaching critical mass, approaching the tipping point where the collective consciousness would shift irreversibly, where the new Earth would emerge not gradually but suddenly, not partially but completely, not as future promise, but as present reality. And through it all, through the years of practice and teaching and service and growth, one truth remained constant, became more certain with each activation I witnessed, with each transformation I supported, with each soul I watched remember its divinity and step into its power. The truth that Jesus had demonstrated, that the Nordic being had taught, that my own experience had proven beyond doubt, that the kingdom of heaven is within, that the power to perform miracles resides in the biology of every human body, that the pineal gland is indeed the seat of the soul, the throne of consciousness, the gateway to divine intelligence, and that activating it through the technique of breath and intention and energy cultivation is not mysticism or metaphor but practical science, demonstrable fact, reproducible technology available to anyone willing to practice, to persist, to open, to receive. The churches had taught us to worship Jesus, to see him as separate, as unique as the only Son of God. But this was never his message. His message was, follow me, do what I do, become what I am. These things I do, you will do also, and greater things. The kingdom of heaven is at hand within you, available now. Not someday in the future, but in this moment if you have eyes to see and ears to hear and a heart willing to open and receive. The technique is the key. The breath is the foundation. The pineal gland is the portal, the kundalini is the power, and Christ consciousness is the result, the natural consequence of human biology functioning as it was designed to function, of divine potential actualizing as it was meant to actualize, of souls remembering what they forgot when they descended into matter and agreed to play the game of separation so they could experience the ecstasy of reunion, the joy of return, the triumph of remembering who they truly are after forgetting so completely they believed the lie of limitation, of smallness, of powerlessness. I stand here today, years after that first encounter, transformed beyond recognition from the man I was, not because I'm special, but because I was willing, not because I'm worthy, but because I'm available, not because I'm better, but because I practiced, because I breathed the pattern, because I focused my attention, because I drew the energy up my spine, because I activated the gland, because I opened the channel, because I aligned with the intelligence that created me and gave me the capacity to create in return, to heal, to manifest, to transcend, to become a living demonstration of what every human is capable of when they remember their true nature, when they reclaim their divine heritage, when they activate the Christ consciousness that Jesus embodied and invited all to embody also. The Nordic being told me that what happened changed my soul forever. And this is true not because my soul was created or modified, but because my soul was revealed, remembered, restored to conscious awareness, after ages of slumber, after lifetimes of forgetting, after incarnations of playing small and scared and separate, finally remembering the magnitude of what I am, the eternity of what I am, the divinity of what I am, not as ego inflation, but as humble recognition of the truth that applies to all beings, that we are each and every one expressions of the one consciousness experiencing itself through infinite forms, that separation is the grand illusion, that unity is the eternal reality, that heaven is not a place we go when we die, but a frequency we embody when we wake up, when we activate, when we remember, when we choose to align with love rather than fear, with surrender rather than control, with faith rather than doubt, with the knowing that comes through direct experience rather than the belief based on someone else's testimony. This is my testimony. I have seen, I have experienced, I have activated, I have transformed, I have become, and what I have become is available to you, not someday, not in the next life, not when you're more ready, but now, in this moment, through this technique, by your choice, through your willingness. If you will only practice, only persist, only open, only receive what is being offered, what has always been offered, what will continue to be offered until the window closes and the separation is complete, and those who chose activation move forward into frequencies. Those who chose dormancy cannot access, cannot perceive, cannot participate in, not because they're punished, but because they're honored, because free will is sacred, because no one is forced to evolve, because love compels nothing but invites everything, offers everything, provides everything needed for those willing to receive. The hidden technique Jesus used is hidden no longer, the secret of the pineal gland is secret no more, the path to Christ consciousness is clear and available and proven by thousands who have walked it, who have activated, who have transformed, who have become living evidence that the promises are true, that the power is real, that the kingdom is within, that heaven and earth are merging for those with consciousness to perceive it, with courage to embody it, with commitment to anchor it through their presence, through their practice, through their persistent choice to align with the highest frequency available, to resonate with divine intelligence, to become vessels through which Christ consciousness flows into a world desperate for light, starving for truth, ready to awaken if only someone will show them how, will teach them the technique, will hold space for their activation, will celebrate their remembering, will welcome them home to the family of the awakened, the tribe of the activated, the community of those who know, who are, who embody the second coming not as external event, but as internal realization, not as future promise, but as present reality, not as belief, but as direct experience of the truth that sets free, that heals all wounds, that transforms all suffering, that reveals all limitation as illusion and all potential as birthright, as divine inheritance, as what we always were beneath the amnesia, beyond the forgetting, waiting to be remembered, waiting to be claimed, waiting to be lived.